Well, yesterday I talked about Cuba, and today I'll be damned if I don't talk about South Africa. It's very interesting what's going on in that country right now. For those of you who don't know, Jacob Zuma, the old president, has been arrested for corruption, I guess you'd say. The way that his opponents put it, he sold out the country to a bunch of Indian businessmen. I remember a controversy about this when Zuma was president. I have not followed it very closely, so it's interesting to see it's turned into a full-fledged legal fight, that the state actually went after him, and apparently Zuma refused to testify or something and was held in contempt of court, which to me, again, I didn't look too deeply into the details, and I'm not a lawyer, but that might be because South Africa doesn't have something like the Fifth Amendment, and maybe, the prosecutor said, hey, you have to testify under oath, and he said, I'm not doing it because I don't want to incriminate myself, and so they gave him, I think it was something like 15 months in prison, maybe? And to be honest, the kind of corruption that Zuma may or may not be guilty of probably wouldn't even get him prosecuted in the United States. I don't know how much foreigners are aware of this, but what is considered corruption in other countries is considered business as usual in Washington. It's just a given here that our politicians are selling out our country to special interest groups, whether they be foreign or domestic. They may very well be Indian businessmen, they might be American businessmen, they might be foreign governments, like Israel or Saudi Arabia, or China even. But American politicians have always got plenty of goods for sale. So I will applaud South Africa for going after their corrupt leaders, even if it's in a limited way. From what I understand, there's a lot of corruption in South Africa, and most of it probably is not dealt with. But hey, at least they have an idea that this whole corruption thing is bad and should be dealt with. Now, a substantial subset of the population does not agree with that. Particularly, I guess, Zuma's fellow Zulu tribesmen are all up in arms over his prosecution, and they want him released from prison immediately, and they have been rioting in order to achieve that end. This, of course, has, much like with the BLM protests of last year, demanding justice for George Floyd, has just turned into really the looting of small, medium, and large businesses, and the terrorization, is that the right word, of unrelated civilians. Now, to me, this would not be all that significant of a story. Okay, sure. Folks in some random third world country are rioting because the ex-president is being prosecuted. That happens all the time in countries around the world. What is interesting to me about what's going on in South Africa is that you see citizens there who are armed and are standing up against the rioters, much more so than we saw here in the United States. I mean, here we pretty much had Kyle Rittenhouse, and that kid's whole life has been destroyed over it. Nobody else dared stand up to the rioters here in America. Whereas in South Africa, you have armed bands of armed citizens patrolling the streets, setting up roadblocks, trying to protect their neighborhoods. I have to say, the response of civilians in South Africa to these riots has made me quite ashamed to be an American. I would have never expected that South Africans would be more ready to step up to the plate to defend their communities than Americans, considering how much harder it is to obtain a weapon in South Africa. They make it very difficult on you, the government does, whereas here in the United States, compared to every other country in the world, it's relatively easy. Now, is it a simple thing? No, you still have to go through, some red tape to get a gun here. It is annoying having to do the background check thing because the guy at the gun store sits on hold with the state, in the background check for like 20 minutes. But eventually, you can get your gun. But I mean, South Africa, they make you go through months or even years of waiting and paperwork and all sorts of stuff just to obtain one gun. And you know what? Maybe because of that, folks are a little more appreciative of their right to bear arms because they do have very serious infringements that they're dealing with. And so maybe that makes them say to themselves, gee, I went through all this trouble to get this gun. If I don't use it to defend myself and my community now, what the hell was the point of going through all that rigmarole? You know, it often is, in world history, the folks who have the least freedom who appreciate what freedom they do have the most. I think that it's a commonly understood thing, you know, here in the United States, that the best immigrants are always folks from former communist countries or current communist countries. You've got Poles, Hungarians, Russians, well, I don't know, Russians aren't so popular here as immigrants, Cubans, Venezuelans. They all tend to be pretty staunch defenders of their civil liberties. And I must say, in my experience, the same has been true with South Africans and Rhodesians/Zimbabweans. Now, there seems to be a bit of misinformation going around saying that these people are firing live ammunition into the crowds of rioters. It does not appear that way to me. I think they're firing rubber bullets of some kind, because you do hear people in the crowd in these various videos, you do hear folks like react and cry out in pain, but they clearly no one has been shot, you know, with a bullet, with a lead bullet. There's not blood everywhere. It's just, you know, there are folks in pain. So I'm pretty darn certain they're getting hit with less lethal stuff, which, who knows, maybe less lethal arms are easier to obtain in South Africa. But from what I recall, it's difficult to even obtain a blunt weapon in South Africa, like a baton. There's some of these guys who work, you know, as security guards, who live in very poor ghettos, who can't even afford to get a weapon to carry when they're going to work in the morning, and they're security guards, you know, and they can't even defend themselves on their way to work. And so I would think that something like you know, like well, I don't know if you call them a less lethal firearms, but a gun that fires rubber bullets, whatever you would call that, I would think that would be still difficult to maintain or obtain. Excuse my English here. But nevertheless, they are in use, and they're being used quite effectively. Of course, they can't stop all the rioting. There's not nearly enough of them. I mean, I'm shocked that I'm seeing this many videos, because I would just think that there can't be that many people who can actually afford to go through the process to own arms in that country. And I guess unsurprisingly, vast majority of the folks you see doing this are white people, who are a pretty small minority at this point in the country. There are also some Indian fellows, and I guess I've noticed a couple of what are called, now YouTube, don't censor me, because in South Africa they still use this term, what are called coloreds. But other than that, the vast majority of the folks I'm seeing fighting the rioters in these videos are white. And the reason that this doesn't surprise me much is that white South Africans appear to have been preparing for the final collapse of the Rainbow Nation for quite some time. This is something that I, you know, online and chatter and stuff, I've heard for, you know, most of my life. They're waiting on that time. You know, that's kind of their boogaloo over in South Africa, is they have their own version where there's just, you know, the whole government breaks down into chaos and riots in the streets, and then they, you know, have to defend themselves and carve out a new space in the world and rebuild society. Now, I don't think that time is upon us, but this is an interesting test run to see how these various clearly organized South African, I don't know if you'd call them militia groups, but I think they call themselves civil protection organizations. It's very interesting to see how they respond in this kind of a situation. What this shows to me is that there is clearly a community of folks still in that country who are not willing to give up. and are, they seem determined not to become like the white folks in Zimbabwe, who pretty much all had to pick up and leave except for a very, very select, few. Again, white Zimbabweans have become like Americo-Liberians in their country. They are beyond an endangered species. They're like Jews in Baghdad. And their only choice they had really was to move to Britain, Australia, or the United States. But their cousins in South Africa, it seems that there is at least a remnant of that population, despite the mass migration of white folks that you've seen from that country since '94. There is a very clear, as is evident, I think, by this week, contingent of folks there who are hell-bent on digging in their heels and sticking it out for the long haul. Which I have to say, I have to respect that, because if I were in their position, I do not think I could do it. I think I would just pick up and move to the United States. I think it would just be too much of a burden. I mean, you have very popular politicians in that country, like Julius Malema, who just flat out want the white man gone, period. Doesn't want him around, wants him to go back to Europe or however he sees it. And the tide is always moving in that direction. It would be very demoralizing. There's no one saying, hey, you know what, maybe we should stop trying to push the white man out and just let the folks who are still here stay. It's always, it's an incrementalism. It's kind of like dealing with, progressives versus conservatives here in the U.S. Conservatives are trying to fight to the death to defend whatever progressives were advocating 20 years ago. So given the lack of hope on the political front, considering that folks like Julius Malema are gaining in popularity, they're not waning in popularity. There is no real counter to that kind of energy on the other side saying, hey, maybe we should just, not have ethnic strife and everybody should just get along. You get tepid voices that say stuff like that, but nothing serious, nothing nearly as inspiring as Malema. He's popular for a reason, because he actually believes in something, despite, from what I see, he is quite hypocritical. He's not a very good Marxist, I'll put it that way. He enjoys a little too much of the finer things in life. But getting back to what I was saying earlier, I think it's very clear that the white community in South Africa, based on how so many of them have responded to these riots, are prepared for the situation in the country to continue to deteriorate and to accelerate. And I've heard various different people over the years articulate why that would be a good thing for them, though, to be honest, I don't know. I can't tell you off the top of my head what the idea would be. I don't know if it's just, hey, fight your way through the cities, and then, all the good people in the country, like, regroup in the Northern Cape or something and try and start a new civilization. I don't know. I don't know what exactly their plan is. But if the day that the total collapse of the Rainbow Nation is ever upon us, we shall see. I think that it will be an interesting turn of events. Though obviously, none of this is really positive. It is regrettable what's happened in that country, even though so many folks have predicted what was going to transpire. I think that so many people in the world wanted to believe in the myth of the Rainbow Nation that old Mandela spun back in the 90s. So, with that said, I guess I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.